Oh yeah. Well, the mordida experience really occurred when I was a kid. My
Okay.
first exposure to Mexican mordida corruption. Mordida means bite, and in Mexico, it simply means that um, that is how people make their way. Uh, you know, taking a bite whenever they can. And in this case, when it comes to law enforcement, they take a little bite of money for, looking the other way or helping to facilitate or worse. And so when I was 7, I think I was 7, maybe 8, I'm driving around Tijuana. I think we're down there to get haircuts and grab tortillas or a piñata. And it's just me and my dad. I'm in the right front passenger seat. My dad gets pulled over by a motor cop, and the cop approaches the window. My dad pulls his wallet out, and he pulls out just enough to see. It was either a 10 or 20. It was in the 60s, so it must have been a 10. With just the tip of his driver's license. So the cop takes the wallet, takes the bill, the 10, and returns his wallet and walks back to his motorcycle and then just takes off.
Have a good day.
Have a good day. My dad looks at me and smiles, and that's the end of that. And so it wasn't until I became older that I realized, hey, this is corruption. Dealing professionally in Mexico. So, very conscientious of how things worked in Tijuana, and I reflected back on my time in Mexicali and realized, hey, I feel the same way that.
So I wanted to mention, you talk about the corruption down there and the $10 bill with your dad. When we were in Colombia, it never happened to me, quite honestly. We had these diplomatic carnets, these little red books, and when you got pulled over, you'd flash that, and pretty much everybody recognized it. But my wife was out shopping one day, and a traffic cop pulls her over, comes walking up to the window, and it was close to Christmas time. And he's jabbering at her in Spanish, and she speaks a little bit of Spanish, but not a lot. She's just giving the innocent look. Lo siento, no hablo español. I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish. Mm-hmm. And, finally he just holds his hand out. He's not wanting your driver's license registration. and she's like, I'm sorry, I just went shopping. I have nothing. And he's jabbering back and forth, and she won't let go. I mean, she's tenacious when it comes to standing up for what she believes in. And finally, he just got exasperated, just like, oh, shit, and she just storms off back to his motorcycle and rides on off. But so that just an example of that. Corruption's not limited just to Mexico. You know what I mean?
You mean he didn't say, I take credit cards?
Well, this was back in the early 90s. I know. They didn't have credit card readers back then like we do now. That's funny. All right.
Oh my God.
Okay, so
yeah.
You get finished there in California, and you're ready to go back overseas again. Where do you go this time?
I was fortunate enough to get selected to go to my father's homeland, Costa Rica. So I reported to the embassy at San Jose, in Costa Rica, and worked there for just about 2.5 years before I got promoted.
Now that was in the late 90s, right?
That was in 98 when I reported, and I partnered up with Joe Evans, another guy we know. Yeah, famoso Joe Evans.
Absolutely,
machine.
Was he the boss in the office then?
No, the boss was Vance Stacy, and one of the Joe and I were partners, and Doug Cortonovus was down there. Carlos Vallejo was there.
Doug Cortonovus and I went through language school together, learning to speak Spanish, and then we were stationed in Colombia together for the 3 years I was there.
Wow. What?
I know, once again, it's a small world. Was Gaddis already gone, or had he not gotten there yet, Dave Gaddis?
No, he was gone. Yeah.
Yeah, and for our listeners, we had Dave on here, episode 74, back in October of 1922. I love that guy. his book is fantastic. His experiences are unbelievable. If you haven't listened to Dave yet, go back and listen to episode 84. Just very eye-opening, the things that he went through. It's very similar to your experiences here. Is what I remember most vividly is, and I got to Miami in 1987. I think earlier that year or the year before is when he and his partner, A.D. Wright, got in a shootout. And A.D. got shot in the eye, lost his eye. And Dave ultimately saved his life by killing the shooter inside the house. But just an exciting story. So if our listeners, if you haven't heard that one yet, that's a good one to go back to listen to. So now you're in San Jose again. We talked a little bit about the Pan American Highway. Can you tell us a little bit more what that is and what the significance of that is?
So it was, during the era, the time when the massive cocaine flow shifted from the Caribbean corridor to Mexico, and a lot of coke was being boated in, moved overland or from the Darien province into Panama, and then up the Pan American Highway via tractor trailer, or fast boated into both Panama, Costa Rica, and even sometimes further up north through Central America. But the Pan American Highway provided overland access all the way up into Mexico. So Guatemala was a favorite staging area for major cocaine shipments that were transiting Central America. And Costa Rica, we had good relations with many of the offices throughout Central America, particularly in Panama and Costa Rica. So we would tag team Colombian transport cells that were working in that region. And thanks to the Costa Rican wiretap laws, we were able to intercept targets and, basically expand an investigation, which is, all about that from a SOD. That's what the benefit of wiretaps was, allow you to expand the investigation, identify all the different players, locate their assets, and dismantle it from top to bottom. And that's what we did. Joe was a wiretap guy out of Miami, and knew what he was doing. Excellent. Even though his Spanish was not native, that guy could communicate. He learned Spanish like nobody's business. And even though he was junior to me, I learned a lot from him. He was one of the best agents I have ever worked with, and we had a good time. So, the Costa Rican counterparts loved to work, and they loved to drink.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of both, but they were very effective in the utilization of their wiretapping abilities, and we were able to target one particular case that comes to mind. Your listeners can Google U.S. versus Mejia and Rios, and both Joe and I are in that case, because when we took them down and had them removed from Panama, which is where they were ultimately grabbed via rendition, that became the basis from which our bilateral 959 group was created. And so you can either Google my name or Joe's name, Mejia and or U.S. versus Mejia and Rios, and that story, that investigation will pop up. But we had a lot of success, and during that period of time, a lot of cocaine. It was not unusual to see a load of 1 ton to 2 tons being taken off, seized from a tractor trailer.
Yeah, that's just a little bit more than personal use, isn't it?
The beauty of the 959, that was the very first time we charged 959, which was basically a federal statute that charged crimes committed against the United States. So the perpetrators, kingpin recluse that they were, couldn't hide in Colombia, Bolivia, Costa Rica, All they had to do was conspire and intend to move 5 kilos or more into the United States. With that knowledge and with our ability to prove that in court, they could be convicted.
And you probably remember Rob Zaharashevich. We all call him Rob Zach because I can't pronounce his last name correctly. And we've had him on here a couple times explaining a lot about the 959 and the 960 groups and what they focus on and some of the cases. But it's interesting to hear that this was the first case that was brought on by that. And what that does is, it gave the United States to reach out and touch people. The traffickers thought, well, they're untouchable if they never step foot in the United States, because one of the elements of a crime is you have to establish venue within the jurisdiction of the court where they're being prosecuted. And federally, they have to be within that federal jurisdiction of, like when I was in North Carolina, you had the Eastern District, the Middle District, and the Western District of North Carolina. So if you're charging somebody in the Middle District, which I was stationed in Greensboro, North Carolina for a while, they had to have committed a crime within that Middle District. So what this 959 section does is it took away that protection of venue from them, and it's not used against like drug users. You're not going to charge a weed smoker with that. You're going after the kingpins. You're going after the biggest controllers, the command and control organizations of the biggest drug cartels in the entire world. So it's not something that was taken lightly. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about should they do away with it. It's used to protect our country. Why the hell would we want to get rid of it? But I'm about to get on my soapbox here, and I don't want to do that because I want to hear more about your story here, Mike. But I love the fact, and Joe Evans is a legend within DEA. Javi and I were speaking in the UK, and we've been over there 2 or 3 times, but we were in London, and I told Javi, I said, you know what, let's just call Joe and see, because we knew he was working for a bank then. So just, made a cold call, and I said, hey, Joe, Javi and I are in town. He's like, oh, great, let's get together, let's go have a cold drink. And I said, well, I mean, London's a big city, man. I don't have no idea where you are. You're probably going to have to come to us. And he said, well, where are you? And whatever hotel we were in, I told him, and he's like, dude, can you see the River Thames? And I said, yeah, I'm looking at it. He said, do you see the business district across the river? Do you see that big building with the bank that I'm working for, their initials? That's where I am. So our hotel had a little ferry boat. We jumped on the ferry boat, went across the Thames River, walked up a couple blocks, and sat down with Joe and some of the people he worked with there. He had not changed a bit. That man can probably drink more beer than you and I and several other people all put together. But just, he is a legend. I love the guy. He is extremely aggressive, extremely intelligent, even though he's a former Marine. He overcame that. So that's a joke for all our Marine friends out there. Don't come and get me. But this is why I love talking about you, because it just brings back old memories, and we're talking about old friends, and it's all good, man. I love it. I love it.
Truer words were never spoken, Steve.
So
outstanding. Now, yes.
You spent, what is it, about 3 years in Costa Rica?
About 2.5. Yeah.
And what, did you get tired of it, or did another opportunity come along, or did your wife tell you you're leaving, or what happened?
Joe got promoted and went to Caracas as the boss. Mm-hmm. And he got his 14 there. And he told me Guadalajara came open, and I was one of those guys where, I thought, I'm happy being a 13, blah, blah, blah. Joe told me how much of an idiot I was and said, dude, put your name in that, throw your name in the hat. And I did, thinking, whatever, I'm not going to get it, but I'll appease my partner. I threw my name in the hat and got it. So off to Guadalajara I go as the resident agent in charge. So, and that happened to be, I don't know, probably ranks up there my favorite post of my entire career.
So, well, let's just talk about the significance of a U.S. DEA agent going to Guadalajara. What department in Mexico is that in?
Oh, the state of Jalisco.
Right. And what is Jalisco known for?
Well, Guadalajara is known for tequila and mariachi. Jalisco.
Sounds like Javier. Yeah.
I know it's where our minds go, right? No,
Yeah.
it was an honor to get that position, um, because that's where Kiki was abducted in 1985, and so it meant a lot to me to be able to, um, you know, work in the spirit of keeping his legacy alive,
And
doing as much as we could.
and so, I mean, think about the fact that we've already had Kiki Camarena kidnapped, tortured, and murdered in Jalisco. A short time later, another agent, Victor Vasquez, is kidnapped or forcibly detained, whichever you want to call it, by the Mexican police. And the agents there go and save him as he's being tortured. And now you think it's a good idea for you, Mr. Mike Chavarria, to go hang out in which, I mean, it's known that a lot of members of that cartel hang out there, right?
Guadalajara could be described as especially in that era, could be described as the Medellin of Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the center of the universe for Mexican kingpin traffickers. And at one point, it was like the neutral ground for many of the traffickers and their families, because it was one of the nicest places to live in Mexico. Beautiful, second largest city in the country, but you felt like you were out in the country. It was the climate was temperate. It was very much like San Diego, California, Mediterranean climate. The food was incredible. Again, tequila, mariachi, but yeah, it was a challenging place to work. And like I had said previously, Mexico had not changed. It was the same poker playing phenomenon that I had experienced when I was in Mexicali. It's funny that when I left Bolivia, Victor Cortez had been my boss.
Oh, yeah.
And shortly after, just a couple weeks after I reported to Calexico in '86, he gets hooked up in Guadalajara, meeting with an informant. And like you said, he was detained, but he was detained being tortured for 8 hours, and was only rescued because of the agents in the office in Guadalajara managed to find out where he was located, got the ambassador involved, got the governor involved, and he was lucky. He was lucky to have survived, and he wasn't in good shape when he walked out of there. He was fairly well banged up.
And for our listeners here, Victor is a massive man. This guy, he could be a professional bodybuilder. When I went through the DEA Academy in 1987, he was an instructor up there, and he just, you just look at the guy like, that's the last guy on the staff I ever want to tick off up here, because he'll pick you up and just snap you in two like a toothpick. And you know what? We've asked Victor to come on the show. He's not comfortable telling his story right now. We respect that completely. Victor, you're still a hero in my book, brother. And if you ever get to the point you do want to tell your story, you always have an open invitation here on Game of Crimes. But so now you're hanging out in Guadalajara here. You're maintaining a low profile. You're the new boss there. But how did you find out that somebody might know who you are and that you're there?
So I had kids. They were high school age. And I've always taught our kids, that whenever asked, I offer them the State Department. Say, I work for State Department security. And given the fact that we drive armored cars, you can't miss it. It's convenient to say security, because, they drive around armored cars too. It's believable. So a girl that my high school age daughter meets, asks, they get to talking to, and just out of amusement, I guess, says, hey, so your dad is now the new head of DEA, right? And my daughter, says, no, my dad works for security. My dad works as security. And the girl, who has second generation Sinaloan family, moved from Sinaloa to Guadalajara during the era when the massive migration of Sinaloan kingpins forming the
Mhm.
Guadalajara cartel moved. They were basically, beneficiaries of all of that.
Mhm.
The girl says, "Oh, come on. I'm not going to say the name." She says, "Everybody knows. Nobody cares. In fact, so-and-so was the outgoing head of the office." So,
Wow.
yeah. So, oddly enough, they're still friends to this day.
Wow. I mean, these are high school kids that know who the head of DEA is and who the last head was.
So, yeah, and there's no hiding. We were, at one point, and a lot of things that happened in a short period of time while I was there that made me realize, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a major trafficker. They live in your neighborhood, and in fact, they did. They lived in our neighborhoods, and I remember walking in the office, stomping my feet and saying, "You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a trafficker around here." And I got the look, and one of the agents said, "Well, that's why we're here."
Glad that light bulb came on, huh?
I guess you're right.
Well,
So,
let me ask you. So now you're there in 2001. You get there just prior to 9/11, and Kiki's murder was in 85, 86. Is that right?
85. Yeah.
So did
85.
you feel? I mean, and that's another. We're talking 15, 16 years later. Were you concerned about your safety down there based on what happened to Kiki and Victor?
Oddly enough, I very careful. We have four-man office, and we'd all sit down and reminded ourselves that it is Mexico. There is corruption. But, as long as we, partnered and let everybody communicate, just like you in Colombia, you were there at the most dangerous time any agent could have worked in Colombia. You got to have your head with you, your wits about you, and not do stupid things, take ridiculous chances. Everything's going to be okay. So what we did, and it worked out, was we went out and made friends with every counterpart that was willing to make friends with us. Not to say that we trusted one another naively, because it is in Mexico. It is the person. It is. It's not the individual that is corrupt. It's the system that promotes corruption, because corruption is somewhat of the grease that keeps the machine going. And that's just the way it is. So when I was down there and reminded early on that the traffickers were in control, we met with an informant and with the counterparts that basically controlled that informant. Of course, we paid the counterparts, and they paid the informant. And I just wanted to assess the various sources that we had. And it was at like the equivalent of a Denny's. I think it was a Sanborn's. And it was late night, and I thought we'd be the only ones in the restaurant. So we show up, we went in the back of the restaurant. We were the only ones. Within 5 minutes of sitting down with the informant, a couple counterparts, me and another agent, in walks a narco junior, not a peasant drenched in gold, but a rather good-looking kid, young guy, but had all the accoutrements of a narco. He had the $9,000 watch, the Gucci shoes, blah blah blah. He goes and sits at a table across from us and tries to be inconspicuous as he drinks his orange juice or whatever the hell he had. But he's eyeballing us, right? And he's got his little Nextel, and we knew that we were being watched. So we decided to pay our bill, depart. So I went with the two counterparts in the back of their vehicle, together with the informant. We sat in the back. We depart the restaurant. My agent goes in the Jeep car separately, and then that was it. So shortly after we go outside, get in our cars, and leave, all of a sudden we get 2 blocks away, and we get lit up by a state marked patrol car, truck, and we find a lit area in an area where there's a little bit more traffic, Main Street, and then we stop. The guys come out with weapons. I think one guy is carrying like an Uzi, and the other guy a shotgun, and walks up to the window, and it was just for intimidation. But we had already had this experience in '99 with OCL surrounding, the FBI and the DEA, and I'm thinking, oh crap, what's this? And comes up, knocks on the window, just the front. My doors in the back are locked, and I'm sitting there with the informant. The state cops say, I pulled your vehicle over because it matches that of a stolen car. It was just a bunch of BS. And he said, who are you guys? And the counterparts had to identify themselves. So they pulled out their federal badges and said, we're Mex Feds. And then the guy looked in the back seat. They wanted to know who the informant was. Exactly. Who are the guys in the back? They're all Mex Feds too. And he asks again, who are the guys in the back? And then he starts jerking at the door, tries to open the back door, and it's locked. And he says, why don't you guys get out of the car? And the Mex Fed up front, the driver said no. And then he gets on a radio and pretends to be communicating with the base. Of course, he wasn't talking to anybody, but he gets on the radio and says something about the location, being stopped by state cops, blah, blah, blah. And so the state cops realize they're not going to get anywhere with it. They get frustrated and they say a few cuss words and walk back to their truck and leave. But that was the first instance when it was a reminder to me, you're not in Kansas anymore, and you're just a visitor here, and you're not in control. So, well, and that was just like early into it, like 2 or 3 months.
And the incident you're talking about with OCL Cardenas having the FBI and DEA agents stopped, the DEA guys, Joe Dubois, who you know very well, we both know very well. We're trying to get Joe to come on the show. He agreed to come on several months ago, but he's got a very busy schedule. And we'll talk more about that once we get him on the show. But it just what a terrifying situation to go through, especially knowing the background of what happened to Kiki Camarena and Victor Vasquez there. Even though it was 15 or 16 years ago, it's you talked earlier about the pucker factor. I can't imagine what the pucker factor was at that point. Now, as you guys are developing cases down there, is this when you started working with Special Operations Division that DEA has up in Washington?
Exactly. That was a big thing. SOD was, had all the, it was like the Dirty Dozen, we had the biggest and the best agents up there working in OSA, which was the part of SOD that supported Central America and Mexico. And it was a lot of fun. That's where I first met Keith Bishop, who happened to be a suite mate to Joe Evans. And right in your shop, that was Keith Bishop and I had contact. And John McCabe and Kurt
Fallon.
Yep. And of course Doc Whitlock, the analyst.
Yeah. He was something, wasn't he?
I had a great interaction with SOD. Became my new best friends. So it was all telephone intelligence that we were swapping. And what started that relationship was a 9.6 ton seizure out of Manzanillo, and we were able to link that seizure, the port there in Colima, a major port on the Pacific side, to a load that belonged to Nacho Coronel and Mayo Zambada, brokered by none other than La Reina del Pacifico, the Queen of the Pacific, Sandra Avila Beltran. We immediately focused in on them, and that's when I also met Tim Stommel.
Mm-hmm.
Tim Stommel out of Miami, because they had a case. On that particular seizure. So we helped bring that case together as working with both SOD and Miami, which is what SOD did. That's what they were good at, was bringing folks together and basically brokering the communications. So we're not wasting time. We're not duplicating, and we're able to maximize efficiency, sharing intel.
Yeah, and that for our listeners here, if you haven't, Tim Stommel was a former guest here on the show, episode 75 in November of 22, in which he actually talks about this, the motor vessel Marcel, talking about the 9.6 ton seizure. So there's a reference you can go back and listen to. But also Keith Bishop, and our regular listeners know who he is already. He played for the Denver. I have no idea what that. How do you go from a professional football player to a DEA special agent? But you know what? He became a star within DEA. He did his time when he retired. He was actually working in Afghanistan doing some crazy things over there. I had the honor of, you mentioned OSA, that was the Mexico Central American section within SOD, and I was the ASAC in charge of that, working with all these home run hitters. Just one of the best positions I've ever had. But as you're working with Bishop, he took a special liking to you, didn't he? Gave you a special name.
Our relationship started out with a phone call where he says, "Hey, Mike," he says, "What? Can you tell me what pinche means?" Pinche, Pinche. And so pinche is kind of like our use of the F word. It can be used as a noun, an adjective, an adverb,
or a verb.
Or a verb. So, but literally, and it all depends, it's a regional use term that varies regionally, but generally speaking, and at least in Mexico, it was a literal reference to like the kitchen boy. Right?
Yeah, I don't think that's what it was meant for. He didn't intend that for you, did he?
No. But after I get through of my, 5 to 6 minute diatribe, explanation for Keith, I finally asked, when I came up for oxygen, I said, "Why do you ask?" He goes, I don't know, but thanks, Pinche. And he hangs up the phone. And from that moment on, I'm Pinche. From today.
I was going to say, if you talk to him today, that's what he's going to call you.
Oh, he's going to call me. If you call him, he's going to tell you I'm Pinche. Oh yeah, Pinche. In fact, he may have referred to me on your show as Pinche. I don't know.
He's a real piece of work. I mean, he's now the vice president of security for the Denver Broncos. But what a practical joker! I may have told this story before, but it's worthy of telling again. And the head of special operations back then was a gentleman named Joe Keefe, and Joe was kind of my rabbi as I was coming up through the ranks there. I worked for him. He was my ASAC in North Carolina when I was a working agent. That's after Columbia. I guess he liked the work that I was doing with another agent, Charlie Graham. And so he kind of helped me out through my career promotions and all that. But he was a legend himself. And everybody had the utmost respect, including politicians. Everybody in Washington had respect for Joe Keefe. So, not a man that you pull jokes on. Well, we had our computer system, our internal computer system was called Firebird. That's just the name of the computer. It, doesn't really have any sense to anything. But Mr. Keefe happened to leave his Firebird station open rather than locking the screen. And when Keith happened to come walking by and saw that the boss wasn't in there, and jumped in and started sending love emails to other people within the SOT. And of course, Mr. Keefe knows nothing about it till all of a sudden people start coming up to him. It's like, boss, did you mean to send that email? He's like, what are you talking about? So that's and you didn't want to leave your BlackBerry laying around and have it unlocked if Keith was close by, because he'll send messages to the administrator. And, I think Michelle Linhart was our administrator back then, who we've had on the show. And she might get a message that says, I've always thought you're one of the sexiest women in law enforcement I've ever seen. And that's not a message I want going to the administrator. Oh, the guy he has no limits, but just love him to death. But now back to you, and you had another little funny story about people knowing who you were in Guad while you were there, didn't you? I think while you were working one of the cases, your kids going to the American school. Does that ring a bell?
Oh God. Yes, it does ring a bell. Okay, I'm not sure if I want to mention the the trafficker's name, but I'll describe the situation as follows.
Mhm.
This is a kingpin out of Central America who had fugitated his country after a major cocaine seizure, money seizure. He fled unbeknownst to us to our backyard. We were sent a lead from that country's office and our counterpart DEA office saying we think the counterparts believe he's in your area. Well, our area is in a region that of responsibility. It takes up 5 states, and there are a lot of nice areas where people like that can disappear. So I assigned the case to an agent in the office, and it goes on for a few months. I mean, like 3 or 4 months. And then finally we get peppered with, what the hell are you guys doing? We said he's up there. Can't you find him? Blah, blah, blah. So the agent and I, we go down to that country and we sit down with counterparts, sit down with DEA, and they describe the family. Well, the family is the wife is a gringa, is an American. The kids speak English. And okay, and so we get a few more specifics. I go back home, sitting around at the dinner table with my kids. I'm saying, "Hey, do you guys know of a family that's from this country?" Blah blah blah. I describe the kids, and my daughter looks at me and she says, "Dad, you don't ever pay attention. That's so and so, my best friend." Oh, Kurt Fallon is my witness. Okay. So, because he heard the story afterward, and I think he was in charge of working that particular case, and it turns out that not only was he my daughter's best friend, the daughter of this major kingpin, but he had been over our house, and we had been over his house.
Oh,
having a drink or two, just, not sitting down and spending Christmas barbecues, none of that, just brief contacts. And, I didn't think anything of it because everybody in Guadalajara, businessman wise, had a bodyguard. Everybody had a bulletproof vehicle, armored car, and they were all, dressed in business attire. This guy didn't look any different. I didn't think anything of it. The wife. Okay, so by the time I pull my head out of the dark place below, I find out that they had just left. They picked up and departed 2 weeks earlier. And my daughter reminded me, yeah, I told you my best friend had moved. They went to someplace in the States, which was BS. It was just fictitious. And, the so-and-so's learning, taking surfing lessons. Well, allegedly moved to a desert location. So I knew that was a crock. And make a long story short, my daughter's still staying in touch with this girl. I should have signed her up as an informant because, we could have paid her a nice fee through the IP, and finding ultimately the right phones with SOD's help. We were able to locate the family, which is still in the area of our responsibility, outside of the Guadalajara, of course. And then we were able to track Daddy, who was having an affair with another woman. And, it's always the woman. Got to focus on the woman. Whether it's the wife, the girlfriend, whatever, it's always the woman. And she led us to him. We hooked him up. He managed to pay his way out of jail, fled to Colombia, got hooked up in Colombia, didn't get hooked up, turned himself in, and managed to be our a source. So that's that story. So egg on my face, Steve. Egg on my face.
Yeah, but you just don't know. I mean, you just literally don't know. I don't know a better way to explain this. Obviously, had you known, there would have been a lot different circumstances, but wow.
Can't swing a dead cat without hitting a major trafficker.
We might have to put that on a sticker or a shirt. That must be a Texas saying. I've never heard that before.
It was fun.
So
yeah, it's fun.
Now, after you finish up Guadalajara, you're down there for how long?
4.5 years. Loving every minute.
Now you went from Costa Rica to Guadalajara, and if I remember correctly, in DEA you could do 6 years, 6.5 years overseas, and then you were required to come back to the United States for a couple of years. Is that right?
That's right.
And so, where did you end up after Guadalajara?
I ended up going to Houston, which happened to be where Keith Bishop was.
PJ Keith.
PJ Keith.
Sounds like a kid's cartoon show.
Yeah. So I reported in the summer of 2000.
And I know about an operation you guys work, but I want to hold that off and just a little bit longer before we talk about it. You guys ended up. So we made the mention of Ocio Cardenas, who was one of the Mexican heads down there, one of the biggest kingpins, and he gets arrested and extradited to the United States. Did you have anything to do with that, or what were the results of him being arrested?
Okay. So ever since he surrounded those agents and threatened them with, threatened to kill them, basically, in 99, he became one of the top 10 most wanted. And then after a significant amount of pressure was placed on the Mexicans, they turned their turrets to go after everything Gulf and Zeta. And this guy was, the number one villain on our sites. And so he was based out of Matamoros. And finally, his karma caught up to him, and he was arrested and jailed in March of 2003. So from 2003 until the time he was extradited in 2007, he was still running his cartel from prison. He was in prison with none other than Benjamin Arellano Felix, and was still running things. And but his claim to fame was recruiting and creating probably the bloodiest organization that has ever, walked Mexican soil. They became known as the Cartel of Zetas. But when he recruited them as little hitmen, bodyguards, tax collectors for the Gulf Cartel. The Gulf Cartel is the drug trafficking machine, and the Zetas, which were basically deserters from Mexican special forces, trained by the United States Special Forces, I might add. They went to the dark side after OCL, convinced them that they would be receiving fame and riches, and as it was, they were. And he was a very, very smart businessman. Ended up being, very violent businessman, and recruited these guys. And he initially recruited the 13, and that 13 led to an ultimate 30. And kind of like the biker gangs, everybody else that got recruited, they were like associates, right? But the organization grew. So the Zetas initially were subordinate to the Gulf Cartel. They were one big family. So when I reported to Houston, Keith Bishop, Pinche Keith, was focused in on working the Gulf and the Zetas, and they were collectively referred to as like the company, one organization. So OCL was extradited in 2007, in January of 2007. So he was flown in on a government PFP airplane, federal law enforcement airplane, as were several other extraditees. They flew in, and we were able to make contact with him, read him his rights, and interview him, interrogate him, which we did. Being the rock star that he felt he was, he wanted nothing more than to regale us with all of his awesomeness. And we got him to talk about everything from some of the the interworkings of the Gulf Cartel, generalizations of drug trafficking, the war that was steaming, and his philosophy about how without him everything was going to fall apart. And sure enough, it did. The Zeta guys no longer respected the Gulf leadership, nor his brother, Ezekiel Guillen, Cardenas Guillen. And then there started to become a fray. And then over time, by 2010, there was an all-out war between what used to be partners, and they were going at it, watered down remnants. The scary thing is that after he was prosecuted, sentenced, sent to jail, he'll be coming out in August. So guess what's going to happen?
24?
Yes, sir.
What's going to happen?
Shit is going to hit the fan. That man who is still fairly young enough to charm, whoever he has to charm and try to regain some. I'm sure he's on the way to reorganizing his loyal supporters and followers.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
it's just. I was just. How old is he? I was trying to find his date of birth here, but I don't see it.
I think he's in his 50s. He's still fairly young.
That's relatively. Let me see if I can get it here. 56. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea he was that young.
The big question is whether he's gonna, go to jail in Mexico, or not. Now, here's something came from his mouth. In 2006, when Felipe Calderón was elected, OCL told us that the drug trafficker money was going to AMLO. AMLO is the current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. This is my opinion based on what we're seeing today and how handcuffed our agents are in Mexico. You can kind of understand what OCL was saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's his trafficker's choice.
I've been interviewed on some Fox channels, some Newsmax, MSNBC about different things. It's just the little 2-3 minute interviews that you do, but they're usually asking questions about Mexico. And my reference to the current president down there is he's either the most naive person that's ever been born in Mexico, or he's the most corrupt. And he's not naive. I mean, that guy, we saw recently he came out and he's wanting the United States to give $20 billion, not only to Mexico, but Central American countries. You talk about extortion. It's outrageous is what it is. And I don't want to go down that road because that's a whole different topic. And I do want to come back to an operation called Band of Brothers here in just a second. But when you finished up in Houston, what was your next post?
I went down to Mexico City as an SOD liaison. So, from my days at working with SOD, I didn't get enough of it. I wanted to be in the mix. So my boss was Carl Pike, one of the, just like you, a famous, well-known, well-respected man that you never wanted to disappoint. Mm-hmm. Just amazing. And so I had the good fortune of working for him. And then, of course, Dave Gaddis was the head of the office at the time. He was replaced by Joe Evans. So I was back with my partner.
There you go.
And we had a good time. It was also a very tumultuous time during the sexennial or presidential administration of Felipe Calderón. Mm-hmm. When we felt like we were making significant headway, and we were, against the Gulf and the Zetas. Of course, Chapo, was still considered like Casper the Ghost. Every time we'd mount an operation targeting him, he represented Sinaloa. It was always the plate. The food was on the table, the coffee was still hot. I just missed him. So that got old, but of course it didn't surprise us. And we went after whoever, that was our job. Let's go after whoever we can go after. And let's face it, the Gulf and the Zetas were big fish. And so we put our eggs in that basket and made the best of it. And and they were all mostly Zetas and Gulf targets that we were chasing, and had some significant successes.
Yeah, there's no shortage of targets, that's for sure. I just lost my train of thought there. So when you finished up and I'm rushing through the end of your career here just because there's two things I want us to get back to before we run out of time. You spend how many years in Mexico City, and then where did you go next?
So I spent 2.5 years in Mexico City as the SOD liaison, and then went back to Houston, thanks to Mr. Zoran Yankovic, another famous leader within the DEA brotherhood.
Oh yeah, I thought the world of Zoran. It seemed like he was one of those guys you either loved him or you hated him, because there was a lot of people that didn't care for him too much. But I respected that man till I finished up my career.
I loved him.
And now you finished up in Houston. When did you retire from DEA?
December of 2017.
And that's how many years? I can't count that high.
Well, going on 7 years now.
I mean, to your total DEA career.
Oh, geez, about 32 years plus a Naval Criminal Investigative Service, 33 and a half total.
Wow. Very distinguished career. It's, it's funny because when we talk about all these different posts that we've been stationed in, it sounds like none of us can hold a job, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like we're trying to stay one step ahead of the law.
Yeah. That's what poor performance will get you, getting kicked out from one office.
Yeah, I don't think you've ever had that problem, brother. So what I wanted to go back to is while you were in Houston, you and Keith start working this operation called Band of Brothers. And this is during a time when I was still in Special Operations Division. And I was coming along towards the end of my time as the ASAC over Mexico Central America, and was going to move into the executive assistant to Derek Maltz, who we've also had on the show. And he's a story just in himself. But tell us a little bit about Band of Brothers and how that's kind of developing into another project you're working on.
While I was in Guadalajara as the RAC, we really made some pretty decent friends, and the Mexicans would tease us about two things. They said, you guys are like to throw all your eggs in one counterpart's basket, only to be disillusioned and disappointed. And at that time, it was Genaro Garcia Luna they were all laughing at us about, because they said, he's as corrupt as, he's as dirty as a gardener's wash rag. But, we may have known, and we may have developed some information, some intelligence, but unless you got the smoking gun and the evidence, you got to work with whoever the Mexican government tells you to work with, period.
Yep.
So, along those lines and over tequilas, they would say, hey, you guys think Nacho Coronel and Mayo Zambala and Chapo Guzman, they're the biggest? Well, you haven't seen this group, this family that's growing up right under your nose. And they refer to them as Los Güeros. I won't go out with the full name because I'll tell you about the project that I'm working on afterward, where they'll be fully identified. But Los Güeros, they're the biggest and baddest thing, but they would never give us their names. They would say, you never heard of Los Güeros? Oh, okay. Well, you're the DEA. Go do your DEA thing. Let's see if you can figure it out. So that's what we did. We did our DEA thing, and, with SOD's help, and we kind of linked things and tracked them down, and were able to put seizures together and identify people tied to the seizure. We ultimately identified them and realized they are big hitters, and we were missing the boat. So now these guys were on our radar screen. We managed to develop an informant in a particular office, and that informant came to work for us. And was running around Mexico trying to help us put this case together. At about that time, I get transferred to Houston.
Okay.
Well, information from that informant that's running around Mexico makes its way up to me about a month and a half after I get there, or 2 months. And that information leads to the identification of another informant. that informant happened to be an associate of the first informant. So now we have two sources, giving us information on this particular organization and others related as part of the Sinaloa, what was then Sinaloan Federation, which was basically a cartel of various lieutenants that came together to benefit the greater group. And they controlled most of the country as it relates to cocaine trafficking. So immediately we went to work, but it became such a huge, ambitious project that I immediately contacted Keith and said, help. So he said, whatever you need, Pete. So he signs some guys, but he's still focused on OCL and the big family of Gulf and Zetas, and he's making a lot of headway. Well, one of the guys that we recruited was from that region. So it was really beneficial to not just us, but the entire office in the region and DEA in general. So we went to work on that case, and that case became, we dubbed it Band of Brothers, because Keith happened to be watching that HBO special, Band of Brothers, and came up with that name, and we liked it because they were a bunch of brothers that were on our radar screen. And so the story goes beyond being the typical descriptive development of a DA investigation operation. It gives an up-close and personal look at how drug trafficking operations actually function by getting right next to the kingpins themselves. And it also reveals the intricacies of DEA's, intricate handling of major complex investigations. So that kind of goes towards my project right now that I'm retired. I'm writing a story about the whole thing. And it's not so much about how, like an investigative report, how we went from this lead to that lead and flipped this rock over and found this and it led us to this. No, it's more about the individuals. It's a human story about the individual, the informants who may help make the case. And they're central to the story. Their backgrounds, respective backgrounds, their family backgrounds, and where they came from. But the story that became the book that I have finished, is waiting to be published, is it's not a DEA fairy tale. It's it entails some of the dark politics of the government bureaucracy, and some of the dirty underbelly associated with, you well know, the game of crimes.
It is. It's and if our listeners could see it, I'm smiling because Mike sent me some clips from his book, and it's we tend to be protective of our parent agency, I guess, to a certain degree. But what I like about this is you're laying out the dirty laundry there to show it's not always perfect. There are in all of law enforcement and probably all first responders, there are a ton of type A personalities. And the investigations that we're working on, it's as wrong as this is, we say, that's my case. That's my informant. That's my seizure. And you don't want to share with anybody else because you've worked hard. You've put a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and unbelievable number of hours into these cases. But then when there's events that occur that have to be brought to your attention as the case agent, you don't want to admit it, and I don't want to give away your book because I love the way that it's going, the idea, the plot that you have in that. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is this is not it's not rootin' tootin', hey, DEA is the best thing since sliced bread. You're putting out what happened, and it's kind of an inside look, not only at the dirty laundry, but how people's individual egos and personalities get in the way of protecting American citizens, because that's why we all took this job, for the excitement and to protect our country. So once that book comes out, I don't think it's ready to come out yet, but when it does, we will let all our listeners know. I will promote that book as much as I can for you, Mike, and we'll add it to the book list that we keep on the DEA homepage. So, one last thing, and I know we're running a little short on time here, but given your experience, you have more experience in Mexico than the vast majority of DEA agents ever. I mean, there is a group that has as much experience as you, as maybe even just a little bit more. But based on your experience, and we see what's going on down there with the current Mexican president, and fentanyl coming in the United States, and we're getting inundated with meth again, and people seem to think that Mexican marijuana is going to go away because of legalization here in the United States. Give me 2 or 3 minutes on what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong when it comes to Mexico, based on your experience.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to say there's a drug war being fought, but it's not in Mexico.
There you go.
It was in Colombia, and there's definitely a drug war being fought on our streets here in this country, in the United States of America. But you're not having a drug war being fought in a country where there's no will of the government. There wasn't a will of the government if there was, we wouldn't be as handcuffed as we are, because we're the ones with the intel. We're the ones that know how to develop intel into a prosecutable investigation. We want to link arms with our counterparts. So what are we getting right down there is we're going down there and we're swinging the bat, because if you don't swing a bat, you don't get on base, you don't hit a home run. We keep our agents, I want to hear brag about it. Our agents are the best at what we do. And I'm proud to have worked with guys like you, Keith Bishop, Joe Evans, and I can't say enough about all the good things that we've done. That little case with the book, that's a minor little blip on a big radar screen of good stuff happening. What do we get wrong in Mexico? As a country, as an agency, we do want to project our own ideals and agendas and values and what's right and wrong onto a culture that isn't on the same sheet of music with us. They have a different agenda. From history, 1848, they lost a fifth of their country. Their sovereignty conscious, and they don't want the big brother from the Yankee telling them what to do and how to do it. So let's not be naive about linking arms with guys like Genaro Garcia Luna and thinking he is the game in town, the only game in town. Let's not be surprised when he goes sideways. Let's not be surprised that we get a guy like General Cienfuegos here and we indict him because we got him on the radio or on the phones in league with remnants of the Beltran Leyva cartel. Let's not be surprised at that stuff. And that's part of where we get it wrong. We keep getting surprised and disappointed. So if we can, at a very high level, approach Mexico, with a little bit more of a candid approach to how to work with them, we're never going to figure it out. And I don't have the number of fingers and toes to list how many examples of comandantes and generals. Gutierrez Rebollo, the drug czar. We can go on and on and on about how we've missed it so many times. But I think that's our biggest problem.
Yeah, it's I couldn't agree with you more. I agree with every single word you just said. The optics of what's going on is ridiculous. The Mexicans show over and over again that they have no indications, no impulse whatsoever to help us out here with the drug problem. The freaking president that's down there now is saying, and I don't want to go political here, and I'm not going to, but I just do want to say this, that he's saying that Mexico doesn't have a drug problem. It's the United States that has a drug problem. Oh, we don't produce fentanyl in Mexico. We all know what's going on down there. So, I've always said that when people say about the war on drugs, I think that's one of the biggest misnomers we've ever come up with, because the United States has never been serious about it. We throw money at it. We throw bodies at it. Unfortunately, some of our bodies make the ultimate sacrifice and are killed in the line of duty. But, it's like when Javier and I were going after Pablo Escobar, we sent 2 guys to Medellin. Is that a war? It's ridiculous. And the same thing, you're in Guadalajara, you've got your head in the lion's mouth, and there's 4 of you. I mean, it's more of a joke. And you know this better than anybody because you've been stationed down there. I don't know if our listeners know that, But did you know that DEA agents stationed in Mexico are not legally authorized to carry weapons? We've had two of our guys. We had one guy murdered and the other guy tortured, and we're not allowed to legally carry weapons in that country. I mean, the guys that take on the responsibility of going down there, I just have the utmost respect for you, Mike, and all the other men and women that have faced that danger, that are facing that danger today. I don't know why you do it. People don't know why I went to Colombia. You know, all I can say was the excitement and the challenge. But thank God we have people who have the stones to stand up and accept the responsibility and are willing to risk their own lives and, unfortunately, at times, the safety of their families. You know, you're married. How many children do you have, Mike?
Well, I'm married now. It's a blended family. My wife brought two of her own from her previous marriage. She's an analyst with DEA, spending her last year or so with DEA. And I brought four to the marriage. They're all grown. And it's a very happy blended environment, blended family. So I'm very blessed in that regard.
You are. And I've been doing this a lot more lately, especially in in-person events, where I try to recognize our unsung heroes, and that's our families. They are expected to carry on while we go out and risk our lives and have fun, is what we call it. You know, we're accepting the challenge and we're not backing away from that challenge at all. But our wives or our spouses are expected to carry on, take care of the family while we're out, never knowing if we're going to come home that day. Those are the true. They're equally, if not higher, heroes than the men and women who are out there actually doing the job. So I can't think of a better way to end this interview today. And I don't really consider this an interview. This has been two friends catching up here. Before we finish, you got any last thoughts, Mike?
I do. I just want to say two things. On the family, my wife has taught me the importance of balance. Balance is so important. You know, when we start this job out, we kind of lose track of the bigger picture and how important the family is and the sacrifices that they endure, blah, blah, blah. But balance is very important for new guys coming into this, you know, good versus evil battle to always keep in mind. And then I also want to go back to Mexico and just say, so that people don't think everything Mexico is terrible. By and large, it's a beautiful country. The people are wonderful, law-abiding, hardworking, respectful people, genuinely, I love that country. It's just a relative small group of assholes, thugs, whatever you want to call them, terrorists that have got the country, that terrorized the decent people with just amazing amount of violence. And
absolutely,
the government can't control it or won't control it. It's just a shame.
I agree with you. That's we say the same thing about Colombia. That's my favorite company in the world, in the favorite country in the world, second only to the United States. And until you've experienced it firsthand, you may have a hard time understanding why we say things like that. But man, it's just the opportunity to sit down with you, Mike, after all these years and get reacquainted and talk about old memories and cases and colleagues and friends and families. I can't tell you how special today's episode has been. I can't thank you enough for giving me your time, for coming on to the Game of Crimes. Brother, and I just look forward to seeing you in person at some time in the not too distant future. I know you're heading up to the southeast United States and maybe in the next year or two. So you're ever in Orlando, man, you got a place to stay. And if you don't want to stay here, just call me and I'll come and meet you somewhere.
I look forward to it, Steve. You've always been, one of my favorite people, an amazing leader. I'm so proud to have served with you and guys like you, Keith Bishop, Joe Evans. I mean, I can name them all day long. And I appreciate you having me on the show.
All right, brother. Listen, everybody, Mike, stay tuned. Everybody else, stand by for the debrief. Wow. Can you believe what you just heard? Mike Chavarria, he's got a huge set of, what's a nice way to say this, nads. The adventures he's been on. I just got to recap this for you real quick. I mean, here's a guy who grew up in a somewhat of a rough neighborhood in Southern California. He did well in school, went to college, graduated, did well there, entered the U.S. Navy, and qualified to train as a fighter pilot. You know what? He did his training, went for his annual physical. His eyesight dropped from 2020 to 2025, and they disqualify him. I haven't had 2025 eyesight in I don't know how long. I'd love to have that back. But he doesn't let that down. He goes into what they call the Naval Investigative Service, which we now call Naval Criminal Investigative Service. He gets a taste of working narcotics cases, working with DEA, decides to give that a try, graduates the academy, gets stationed along the southwest border. Now, during that time, this is what's killing me. And I want to really emphasize this because this is how dangerous it was. He's repeatedly crossing over into Mexico as what we call a border rat. And now, he has no jurisdiction down there. And here's the thing. He's trusting his life to the Mexican federales. Now, this was several years ago, so maybe they were not corrupt back then or not quite as corrupt, but that's taken a huge chance. So that wasn't exciting enough. So he decided to join DEA's Operation Snowcap, which he got to go through some special operating training. And then he gets to go hang out in the jungles of Bolivia. And while he's there, what happens? He has a poisonous coral snake slither across his legs while he's trying to relax. I got to tell you, that would have done it for me. I'd have to go get some clean underwear and pants and then get me the hell out of there. Did someone say counseling? Yes, please. And then he liked Bolivia so much, he volunteered and got assigned there permanently. Well, not permanently, but for several years. From there, he went to Costa Rica. Now, I got to tell you, Costa Rica is not so bad. I've been there myself. The cops are great. I don't know if you knew this, but Costa Rica does not have a military. It only has a law enforcement agency. So it's beautiful down there. The weather's supposed to be the best temperate climate anywhere. Comes back in the United States, working back on the southwest border. And what's he do? He starts working as a border rat again, going across into Mexico. I mean, this guy's a glutton for punishment, right? Goes and does his headquarters time in the DEA Special Operations Division, what we call SOD, and then volunteers and gets assigned as the SOD rep in Mexico City. That's what you call jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. Just outrageous. And then he finishes up his career in Houston. I mean, how much more exciting could it be, right? I mean, where do we find these people? They love the excitement so much. They're willing to risk their own lives to help and protect other people that don't even know them and that they'll never know. And it's not just in DEA. The other federal agencies have people who are equally dedicated and committed to the mission, just like our people. And think about it, maybe we should all be committed. And I'm talking about to a mental health facility for counseling and evaluation. I can get tongue-tied here. I got excited with Mike's story today. I got to say, God bless the men and women in law enforcement. We pray that he keeps them all safe. And okay, so let's start finishing up here. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. I loved having Mike on the show. We haven't spoken not at length in years. It's always good to talk to an old friend. He told us some great stories. He really downplayed the danger factor. I mean, if you can probably read into it how dangerous some of the things he was doing, but he's just kind of laughing about it, moving on. I'm not sure what that says about him, but he has written a book. He's looking for a publisher now. So once that's done, I'll let you know when the book comes out. We'll post it on the Game of Crimes website book page. Hearing these adventures from people like Mike and all our other guests, that's why I'm dedicated to promoting our heroes, not just in the law enforcement profession, but also our military veterans and all our first responders. And that includes people who work to help these heroes when they might be suffering from PTSD or other issues as a result of their work. In fact, and here's a little teaser, I've got a guest coming on here very soon who does just what I said, but with a twist. She helps the families of those suffering from PTSD. Her name's Jenna. That's all I'm going to tell you for now. She'll be coming up in the next couple weeks here for another episode. So very quickly, head on over to Apple or Spotify and click on those 5 stars. I'm not sure how that works or why, but it does. So please support it. You can leave comments on Spotify now. So let me know what you think about the show. I'm always looking for ideas on how to improve the show. Also head over to gameofcrimespodcast.com. That's where you find out more information about the show. That's where all the episodes are listed, our book list, and there's more there with more coming. On social media, follow the show on X, formerly Twitter, at Game of Crimes, and on Facebook and Instagram at Game of Crimes Podcast. Now, while you're on Facebook, go to the search bar and type in Game of Crimes fan page. That's run by our favorite mafia queen, Sandy Salvato. She's the lady who rules with the iron fist but wears the velvet glove. The people in that group, I'm not kidding you, they're some of the funniest people I think I've ever met in my life. If you just need to put a smile on your face, go over and check them out. Now, do me a huge favor and tell your friends about Game of Crimes to come over and give it a listen. Or you know what, better yet, tell them to give us a download and a listen, because that's how you get advertisers. What I have found out about the podcast world is the best advertising and marketing is word of mouth. Now, I'm going to do what I can to promote the show, but your efforts are more effective than mine. So help a brother out here. Spread the word about the best weekly true crime podcast available. Listen, thank you guys once again for continuing to support Game of Crimes. I appreciate your comments and ideas, were good or bad. And just remember this, you've heard us say this before, we can have different ideas and opinions, but that doesn't mean we can't continue to be friends, right? So let me know what you think. Finally, thanks for joining me to play the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes. See y'all next time.